Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has tonight issued an ultimatum to President Donald Trump: resign or face impeachment proceedings for incitement of insurrection starting Monday. Quote, "It is the hope of members the president will immediately resign. But if he does not, I have instructed the Rules Committee to be prepared to move forward with Congressman Jamie Raskin's 25th Amendment legislation and a motion for impeachment. Accordingly, the House will preserve every option, including the 25th Amendment, a motion to impeach, or a privileged resolution for impeachment." Democratic lawyer Mark Elias, who thwarted Trump's every post-election legal challenge, explains that a privileged resolution for impeachment suggests that bringing impeachment directly to the floor without any committee activity is on the table. It would move on a very fast track. Two things to note here are that no president has ever been impeached twice. And should Trump be successfully impeached and removed, which is an if, he would be, it would appear, barred from holding federal office going forward. Now, this push for impeachment comes as Trump's support among Senate Republicans appreciably erodes. Nebraska's Ben Sass saying he would definitely consider any articles the House passes. Alaska's Lisa Murkowski flat out calling for Trump to resign immediately. In fact, threatening to switch sides in the Senate. And multiple senators are also calling for their colleagues, Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, to resign as well for their roles in urging on the agenda and inciting the mob attack on the Capitol. And if you think Pelosi is bluffing about Trump leaving, today she said she spoke with the chair of the Joint Chiefs about, quote, preventing an unstable president from initiating military hostilities or accessing the launch codes and ordering a nuclear strike. Meanwhile, Twitter has also heard enough from the president, saying they have, quote, permanently suspended Trump's account due to the risk of further incitement of violence. The big question now is what legal steps can be taken as quickly as possible in the next 12 days, which could be 12 of the most dangerous days the country has ever faced. As the chair of the Democratic caucus in the House, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries in New York has been privy to the impeachment discussions today, and he joins me now. Congressman, explain to me what the message of the speaker is today and what timeline are we talking about here?
Well, the message of the speaker and the broad consensus amongst the House Democratic caucus is that the president needs to be removed immediately because he presents a clear and present danger to the safety and security of the American people and the health of our democracy. That should be obvious to everyone at this particular point in time, given the violent insurrection that he just incited. Now we're exploring the different ways to bring that about. There are really three different pathways. There's impeachment, of course, conviction and removal. There's the 25th Amendment, and we're going to move forward, as I understand it, with Jamie Raskin's legislation, which is important because that would expedite our capacity to avoid having to go through the cabinet to allow Mike Pence to take over the reins of the executive branch. And then there's resignation. There are growing calls for it. Whether this is a president who is willing to accept reality, that's probably an eventuality that will be difficult to bring about.
I want to talk about this 25th Amendment aspect because I actually don't quite understand it legally. 25th Amendment, and I believe it's the fourth section of that amendment, which is quite complicated, which has to do with the possibility of a president being incapacitated. Now, the thing that it contemplates, I think, most obviously is, say, the president's in a coma, or he is on life support or something like that. In this case, it would be the declaration of his incapacitation against his wishes, more or less. And there is a stipulation, I believe, in that section that it's the cabinet or such body as Congress constitutes, and that the idea here is that you would constitute said body under Jamie Raskin's legislation. Am I following that correctly?
That's exactly correct, because otherwise, in order to change an amendment, you've got to go through 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate. The president has to sign it into law, and 3/4 of the states have to ratify it. That's not going to happen. That's hard to happen under normal circumstances. And so because the 25th Amendment does say, or such other body that Congress may constitute by law, that gives us an opening to form a commission that Jamie Raskin has set forth in his legislation, which essentially would be a 17-member commission where you would have 8 members of the medical profession, 4 doctors and 4 psychiatrists appointed by the 4 different legislative leaders. Then you would have an additional 8 former high-ranking members of the executive branch which could include a former president, vice president, secretary of state, secretary of treasury, secretary of defense, and so on. 4 would be appointed by Republicans, 4 would be appointed by Democrats. That would be a total of 16 members of the commission, and then they would select the 17th. We could constitute that commission, and then if a majority of them, as opposed to having to go through the cabinet, determined that the president was incapable of performing his duties, then the 25th Amendment could be invoked in our view.
Okay, that's an untested constitutional theory. I'm not saying you're wrong. Obviously, look, the most straightforward thing would be the president to tender his resignation. I think we all agree on that. And I don't think that the president wants to do that. Although the one argument one could make to the president is that while self-pardoning is very questionable legally, it is the case that presumably Mike Pence could pardon him. And perhaps that would be an inducement for the president to resign. I can't see any other inducement in the next 12 days. And I just don't think he could be trusted with power in the next 12 days. So barring this 25th Amendment, barring resignation, impeachment, there's articles today which I want to read from, drafted by Raskin, Liu, and Cicilline, that Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by willfully inciting violence against the government of the United States. I guess the question to you is, how quickly can you move that to the floor?
Well, we took an important step today to go in that direction because the Speaker needed to constitute the Rules Committee, which she did and was ratified by the caucus. With the Rules Committee constituted, Jim McGovern, who's the chair, could immediately or at such time as appropriate over the next few days convene the Rules Committee, which could take up a privileged resolution, which would allow us to move on impeachment without having to go through the traditional committee approach. Now, under ordinary circumstances, Chris, a privileged resolution would be tabled or sent to the committee of jurisdiction, in this case, judiciary. These aren't ordinary circumstances. In my view, insurrection, sedition, treachery, incited by the president is the classic extraordinary circumstance that would justify a privileged resolution on impeachment.
I want to read to you something that Kevin McCarthy said, the highest ranking member of the House of the Republican Party. Now, this is an individual who, after a marauding mob of seditionists riled up by the president, took over your offices in the Capitol and led to the death of a Capitol police officer, smashed windows, and ransacked the place. After that happened, when you came back in, Kevin McCarthy voted against seating the rightfully elected electors to make Joe Biden the president. He voted against that. This is what he says about impeachment. To deliver a better America for all, partisans of all stripes must first unite as Americans and show our country that a peaceful transition of power has occurred. Impeaching the president with just 12 days left in his term will only divide our country more. What's your reaction to that?
Kevin McCarthy is not just a joke at this point. He's a caricature of a joke. And his rhetoric and his behavior and his activity over the last several days have been the height of irresponsibility. He has no interest in doing anything other than continuing to lick the boots of Donald Trump. That's what he has been doing. For whatever reason, he's made the determination that that is his pathway toward leadership because he's got so many out of control members of the House Republican Conference who continue to peddle conspiracy theories. And on the floor of the House of Representatives, Kevin McCarthy was right there voting with them.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, I imagine you have a busy weekend ahead of you, and thank you for making a little time for us tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
Daniel Goldman is one of the few people in this country with firsthand experience in putting together an impeachment against U.S. president, specifically this president. He's a former majority counsel for the House Impeachment Inquiry, former director of investigations for the House Intelligence Committee, and he joins me now. Dan, let's talk about, look, there is an urgent national emergency. The President of the United States is the President of the United States with full command and control of the United States Armed Forces and all the power that adheres to the presidency, including the pardon power, for 12 more days in the wake of having conspired in public and private on a seditious conspiracy to overthrow the democratically elected government. Those are the facts. how quickly, like, we've never encountered anything like this before, except for maybe Nixon, who resigned. Like, how do you see this in terms of the match between the urgency of what we need and what the law allows? Oh, I think we may have lost. Oh.
Well, unfortunately, the law as it stands right now does not. Can you hear me?
Now we have you. Yep.
Can you hear me now? Sorry, Chris. Yeah. What I was saying is that the law doesn't really match the urgency of the moment. And that is a problem that Congress is facing. On the one hand, it's a good problem to have because there are only 12 more days of Donald Trump as president. And that's what's presenting these problems. To take a privileged resolution to the House floor, to vote on it, without any kind of process for a president to defend himself would be completely unprecedented. You can make good arguments for it. This is unquestionably the worst conduct any president has committed, certainly in the last 100 years. And I'm not a historian, but I would venture to say throughout history. But you are sort of trampling on the ordinary process of impeachment just to try to remove him.
Yeah.
But that's not going to happen before January 20th. Like, everyone needs to be clear. He will not be removed by the Senate before January 20th. So what are you trying to gain through impeachment? It's unclear to me that it's worth the time and energy, practically speaking, because it's not going to work.
Because there's just no way, if they pass it on Monday, McConnell's just going to sit. There's no way McConnell will move that.
Right. Schumer doesn't take over until January 20th. McConnell has some issues with his conference, and everyone is all over the place. And even if it were to pass Monday, which it wouldn't pass Monday, it would have to be it could pass Monday, I guess. But let's just say it passes Monday in a very hastily organized impeachment. Then it goes to the Senate, and there needs to be a trial. There's all sorts of process that needs to occur in a trial to allow for the president to defend himself one way or another. Yep. And so it's not going to happen. I mean, the 25th Amendment is the appropriate course of action now. And rather than resign, I wish cabinet officials would gather together and recognize that their patriotic duty is to remove this person so that he doesn't bomb Iran, or he doesn't create some wag the dog scenario that could distract and can, abuse his power further. But impeachment is all that Congress can do. And that's why they are trying to do it, because they feel something needs to be done. And I certainly understand that. But I don't know that that's ultimately going to meet the objective here.
Yeah, it's useful to hear your sort of clear-eyed thoughts on this in terms of the process, because it's true. Like, it's an urgent emergency, but process exists for a reason, and we don't just jettison it because it's there, and it's there for a reason. The 25th Amendment is the process, but ultimately, I mean, what about resignation? There's no way the guy's going to resign. The only thing he fears, though, is legal exposure. And I do wonder if Pat Cipollone went to him and said, pardoning yourself is really dubious and might actually get knocked down, you should resign and let Mike Pence pardon you.
That's certainly a lot of people have been suspecting that all along. Look, when he issued his video yesterday, released it, and it was so contrary to his video the previous day, which was only done under somewhat duress, it was clear, at least from reading reporting of people who really know him over the last 4 years, that he is afraid of being prosecuted and going to prison. And that is actually a check on him for the next 12 days. If he does anything more, it is just going to be additional evidence that might push this over the precipice into an investigation and a prosecution. So if I'm the leaders of Congress, I am talking to the military, I am talking to the cabinet members, I am trying to rally everyone around containing this man for the next 12 days And it will also occur naturally because it does sound like he is afraid of being prosecuted, and allow Joe Biden's cabinet picks to have hearings, allow the Senate to go through its ordinary business. Let's move on to the next administration as quickly as we can. And by the way, Donald Trump, of course, can be investigated and prosecuted for this or other crimes. There's no accountability at all.
All right, Dan Goldman, who has a lot of experience on this. That was very, very helpful and useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Breaking news tonight. After thousands of 280-character communications to his tens of millions of followers that range from stupid and juvenile to lying and frankly dangerous, Donald Trump has been stripped of the precious. Jack and company have now permanently suspended Trump's Twitter account, finally accomplishing something 3 wives, multiple legal people who are suing him, and his entire White House staff have failed to do. Shutting him the hell up. Twitter cited the risk of further incitement of violence in finally taking action. Meanwhile, tonight, Speaker Nancy Pelosi has given Donald Trump a choice: resign or face a second impeachment or removal via the 25th Amendment. The move comes after Democratic members of the House held a nearly 4-hour meeting today to discuss their options. Pelosi also told Democrats that top military officials assured her that steps were in place to prevent Trump from initiating any military hostilities, including a nuclear strike. Just take that in for a second. Meanwhile, the move toward the impeachment option is on the express track. 3 Democrats have already drafted new articles of impeachment and plan to introduce them as soon as Monday. They state, quote, the president threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a coordinate branch of government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president. A growing number of politicians from both parties have expressed
with weakness.
A day later, Trump released a heavily scripted and edited video message urging a, quote, peaceful transition of power, not once mentioning his successor. Now, it was reported that he did so begrudgingly and at the behest of Pat Cipollone, his White House legal counsel, in order to ward off potential legal trouble for Trump once he leaves office. This morning, Trump showed us who he really is by tweeting on his now suspended account. Quote, the 75 million great American patriots who voted for me, they will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form, exclamation point. And while Trump was defending anti-Semites and vigilantes, President-elect Joe Biden called for their prosecution.
These are a bunch of thugs, and they're terrorists, domestic terrorists. They should be prosecuted. The difference here is this had the active encouragement of a sitting president of the United States. He's been an embarrassment to the country, embarrassed us around the world. Not worthy to hold that office.
The ignominious end of the Trump administration should come as no surprise. For the past 4 years, Donald Trump has, for all intents and purposes, behaved like a maniac. And he will leave the United States the same way he left most of his businesses, in a giant, shambolic mess. For more, I'm joined by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal of Washington State, Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General. And normally I would go to the Congresswoman first. I want to apologize for not deferring to you, Congresswoman, but I have to go to Jonathan Lemire first. Donald Trump suspended from Twitter. It doesn't seem like it would be the biggest story in the world, but he has used that Twitter account to foment violence, to spread lies to his supporters, including to foment and to advertise the, quote, wild rally that took place, turning into a siege on Wednesday. Donald Trump has in the past said that in the 2017, he said, without the tweets, I wouldn't be here. I have over 100 million followers between Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, he said proudly. Over 100 million. I don't have to go to the fake media. He's used it to get around people like you. What do you make of the fact that he is now permanently suspended? And what,
Well,
what did the White House make of it, by the way, more importantly?
Sure. As well, as someone in Trump's inner circle put it to me just in the last few minutes, that losing his Twitter account probably hurts the president more than his impeachment. This was uniquely him. And I don't think it can be overstated how important Twitter was and still was to his rise and is to his presidency. He now, on Twitter alone, has over 88 million followers. He used it, indeed, to get around the mainstream media. But more than that, he used it to sort of as a messaging tool for his supporters. He also used it as policy. He announced wild policies by Twitter. He announced firings, cabinet member dismissals by Twitter. He attacked members of his own party on Twitter. He got into international incidents on Twitter. This was the lifeblood of the Trump presidency. So there's something fitting here as he is under siege from all sides in his now last 12 days that it would be taken from him. His one means to fight back. Trump has always portrayed himself as this counterpuncher, right? That's how he labels himself. And now he can't, at least not in the way that he would want. There's certainly no shortage of sighs of relief throughout Washington about this. There are members of his own staff, fellow Republicans, supporters of his, who believe that his Twitter account is what held him back, that he would keep getting in trouble for all of its advantages, for all the ways he used it to communicate. It also was his undoing. And certainly we saw that play out dramatically over the last couple of days as he did indeed incite people to go to this march on the Capitol. And as it was happening, he used Twitter to release a video in which he told them he loved them. So right now, as his potential exit, his early exit from office is a real possibility, far more so impeachment, it would seem, than 25th Amendment, he now has lost his best way to fight back, to shape the narrative, to try to control the story and instill fear in the Republicans he now needs more than ever.
Yeah, including instilling fear in members of Congress. And I want to go to you, Congresswoman. And I want to say, Rashad Robinson of Color of Change and also Vice President-elect Kamala Harris have been early and vocal advocates for Twitter to suspend Donald Trump's Twitter account. They called it dangerous. They both pushed and pushed and pushed to have this happen. And people didn't really listen to either one of them. As somebody who was also put in jeopardy, Congresswoman, by Trump's tweets, he did advertise the, quote, wild events of Wednesday in advance on Twitter and used it, including to go after Mike Pence, after which Mike Pence was then targeted. You could hear people screaming and threatening him. What do you make of the fact that he's finally belatedly been suspended? And do you feel safer without Donald Trump having access to this medium? We don't have your audio, Congresswoman. We're going to hold on for 1 second. We're going to try to fix your audio. We're going to try to fix the Congresswoman's audio. So let's just try to see if we can fix that. And Jonathan, I'm going to come back to you very quickly. On the point, we do have you back. Okay, Congresswoman, go ahead. Go for it.
Thank you. Joy, it was so essential. And you know that we've been trying to take on all of the social media platforms. And I raised a lot of the questions and concerns that Rashad and other civil rights activists have raised for months when I question Mark Zuckerberg. This is essential. It is late, but it is essential. And just as one of, maybe a dozen or more members that were stuck in the gallery, even after members were cleared off of the floor, the reality is that Donald Trump committed sedition. He incited a violent group of domestic terrorists and insurrectionists to go to the Capitol. And this was the worst, doesn't invoke the 25th Amendment, which I understand he said he didn't want to do, then I do believe the House of Representatives will impeach him, and it is absolutely necessary for the safety and the security of the country, not to say anything about accountability, which requires more, frankly, than just impeachment as well.
And that is a big deal, what you just said, the idea that there had to have been coordination, that these terrorists, these domestic terrorists were able to locate offices. They shouldn't have, as just regular people off the street, known where they were. Let me play really quickly Speaker Pelosi, who's going to have, she's taped an interview with 60 Minutes. Let me just play a little bit of it. Take a listen.
Is anybody running the executive branch of the government? Who is running the executive?
Well, sadly, the person who's running the executive branch is a deranged, unhinged, dangerous president of the United States. And only a number of days until we can be protected from him. But he has done something so serious that there should be prosecution against him.
Well, I gather that the 25th Amendment is off the table.
No, it isn't. Nothing is off the table.
Neil, let me bring you in here. We know that Speaker Pelosi is going to bring a privileged resolution on impeachment. If you could just clarify for us that I assume means they don't have to go through the committee process, meaning the Judiciary Committee doesn't have to do the hearings as they did last time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so they're trying to fast track impeachment, and obviously no final decisions have been made. But I think the House is well right in thinking impeachment right now is important. I mean, it's, I know very significant to Donald Trump personally that he's lost his precious in Twitter and so on. But really, there's something far more important has to happen, which is this person has to be removed from office. There has to be a signal sent so that future presidents don't act this way. And every person in Congress has to go on the record.
Former President George W. Bush and Laura Bush, the former President Bill and Hillary Clinton will all be at the inaugural. And we're facing a situation where you just heard the Congresswoman say it's not clear that there wasn't coordination, whether it was just through negligence on the law enforcement side or active engagement. People that were inside of our Capitol knew exactly how to get to the Speaker's office and how to get to offices they shouldn't have known where they were. There were people threatening the life of the Vice President of the United States while he was nearby in hiding. Is there a way to get impeachment done, not symbolically in order to punish Donald Trump or send a message, but to get him out so that he cannot run for office again, and to do it in an expeditious fashion? How fast can this happen?
100%. The resolutions, which are like the indictment, are introduced on Monday. There can be a vote on Tuesday. It can go to the Senate on Wednesday for a trial. And this is not a trial that need take very long. I mean, all the facts are in front of us. Frankly, the blood is in front of us in the U.S. Capitol. And that's, I think, all you need to know about this president.
And Congresswoman, is that what you foresee happening? You've been in these meetings with the Speaker. Is this going to be a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday done fast-tracked process?
Well, Neil's right. It's an hour of debate with a privileged resolution. So it is very quick on the floor of the House. The evidence is right there. We are the evidence. We were all there. We saw it with our own eyes. There's video of it. My guess is that the Senate could try to delay it, of course, if they don't want to. And it'll be up to people like Lisa Murkowski and others who have come out and said that they think this president needs to be removed, needs to resign or be removed. That is what is on the table for Donald Trump. He can resign. And, and that, frankly, we just have to get him out as quickly as possible. You asked me if I felt safer that his Twitter account had been suspended. And of course, I think that's an essential thing. But this is the man who has access to the nuclear codes. He has full and complete control of all of the intelligence agencies and all of law enforcement. Joy, the French intelligence and NATO intelligence officials have come out and advised the leaders of their countries that this was an attempted coup based on the evidence that they have seen. So I just want to emphasize how deeply unsafe we are. And we have 13 days, almost 12 days before the next president is going to be inaugurated. And none of us, and I say this to you as a woman of color, none of us know if we can be safe in the Capitol because we don't know who is protecting us and who is not. And so I think this is, and I'm not just talking about members of color, I'm talking about our staffs, I'm talking about the entire population. And then, of course, the country, because that's what this is about, our democracy and our Constitution.
That's absolutely the thing that is frightening. That we, as you said, it's not clear whether there are people mixed into the people who are supposed to be protecting members that are part of it. Very quickly, before we let you go, Jonathan Lemire, that inside the White House, how much fear is there about how dangerous Donald Trump could become if he's given 12 more days of power?
Well, Joy, those who are left, and it's a very small group, the inner circle around the president has really hollowed out. These are the true believers. So I don't know that in the West Wing, there's much of a belief that he's dangerous. But certainly we have heard testimony now from a number of people who just left the White House. And let's not give them too much credit here. There's only 2 weeks or so to go before this administration. That's a pretty convenient time to quit in protest. But we have seen cabinet members leave. We have seen White House officials leave. The West Wing former communications director was on MSNBC earlier today warning about what the president could still do in 12 days. So certainly there are circles. There are Republicans who do worry about what could still happen. This is a president who is, seemingly who is, by our reporting, been furious at his own vice president, at members of his staff, at members of his party. He's vowing to back primary challenges to any senator who has stood up against him in the last week. He is still talking about running again in 2024. He is still trying to be relevant here. And I think at this point, none of us should make a prediction as to what the next 12 days can hold.
Absolutely.